My name is Steve Dalton, and I am the head librarian here at the Theology and Ministry Library. And it is my privilege and pleasure to welcome you to this session titled The Prophetic Witness of Gospel Living on the Margins. My job tonight is the easiest on the panel of people who will be up here. I'm just going to cover a few important details logistically, then get out of the way so the program can begin. Specifically, I would like to speak, first of all, about parking. If anyone is nervous about parking in the BC lot, the BC police have promised to ease their enforcement of traffic regulations this evening. So your car should still be there when you go out, which is encouraging. Bathrooms, they couldn't be more convenient. They're just through this door here to the left. And you'll walk, there's a ladies' room immediately on the right, and then the men's room a little bit further down. You may have noticed as you came through the door that we have an abundant supply of water and cookies. We know we're at dinner time here and people came hungry. So please help yourself. And if you'd like to get up in the middle and grab a cookie, feel free to do that. Also, the Agape community has books and other items for sale tonight. And it is a wonderful way to help support Agape in the work that they do, the noble work that they do. So we would invite you to examine the resources that are on the table outside the room. And if you feel so moved, to pick up some of the literature or a t-shirt or something else. I would like to thank our co-sponsors for the program this evening. If we didn't have this kind of support, we couldn't do something like this. So our co-sponsors are the Boston College School of Theology and Ministry. James Burriston is manning a camera in the back, and James is a member of the continuing education staff, and they've just been wonderful to work with. The Church in the 21st Century, which does so much wonderful work on campus and beyond. And they've been very supportive of this program. And also, my boss would get very angry if I didn't mention the Boston College Libraries. A brief, very brief preview of the program. Tom Murphy, who I will introduce to you in just a moment, is going to provide us first with sort of a personalized theological context for this evening's topic. He will be followed to the podium by Suzanne and Brayton Shanley, who will speak with us from their own story, the story of the Agape community, which they co-founded more than 41 years ago. And they have lived in a radical way, the gospel-centered life. So they will hold the Agape experience as a witness to us and an encouragement to us. Then Professor Tom Groome, whom I suspect most, if not everyone in the room, knows Tom. He will offer a bit of commentary, lead us into a period of just personal sharing with our neighbor, and then lead us into a facilitated discussion with the panel of speakers. It is a full agenda, and I would like to get right to it. Back in 2018, the TML, this library, launched a speakers program that we very creatively titled TML Speaks. And we hoped it would become an annual event and that it would spotlight individuals who had important faith-related stories to tell. With TML Speaks in mind, Tom Murphy approached me and suggested inviting Suzanne and Brayton Shanley to speak. And he told me that they had a remarkable story to tell. And so began what I could only best describe as an odyssey, because it has taken us since that conversation with Tom, which I think was early in 2019. It has taken us that long to get here. COVID did its best to derail. We had the event scheduled in April of 2020, and guess what happened in March? So here we are. We're all grateful, very grateful to be here, have been anxious to share this moment with each other and with all of you. So thank you for coming. I pray that you will be blessed by what you hear this evening and what you share this evening. Tom Murphy is a PhD candidate in theology and education here at the STM. His work seeks to foster an interdisciplinary dialogue between Catholic theology, religious education, and disability studies that emphasizes access and inclusivity for people with intellectual disabilities within these fields of inquiry and practice. Tom is also a longtime member of the community of L'Arche, currently serving on the national staff of L'Arche USA. He is one of the finest people I have ever met here at Boston College, and it's a privilege to welcome Tom Murphy.
Well, if Steve had the easiest job, I have the second easiest job. And that's simply to join Steve in welcoming you all and thanking you all for coming out tonight and informing this teaching and learning community that will be here with some wisdom in the room from Brayton and Suzanne, but collectively, we're going to have some conversation and bring this to life a little bit. So um, I think, as Steve said, it was early 2019. Yeah, my goodness, that we started talking about this. I forget exactly what the genesis is of this, but I remember a conversation clearly with Tom Groome, who's my academic advisor, and we were sitting in his office, and I think he had received an email from Brayton and Suzanne around the same time I had, saying like, "What could we do at BC?" And Tom said, "Hey, maybe you know these folks. I'm from Central Mass, and they are as well." And so I said, "Yeah, actually, I know them very well." So they've been a part of my story, and it's a real it's a pleasure to be here to introduce them and to welcome them to campus. I think this is a really perfect place here at the TML to have this kind of conversation at the STM, at the TML, surrounded by, especially here, millions of volumes of theological text, right? A place of study, a place where I've spent hours and hours working. And when I think about all of that theory, all of the good ideas in those books upstairs, all of the good conversations that we have here at the TML, at the STM, all of that is wonderful and important, but it doesn't go very far unless it lands in real lives with real people. And that's what Brayton and Suzanne do. They take all of this wonderful theory and they bring it into praxis. And that is a witness that we need today, and that is an inspiration. I think of my own vocation here to theology, to be studying at the PhD level, and I sometimes wonder how I got here. And as Steve noted, I have a history with the communities of L'Arche. So I think back to when I was a much younger man, and this beard was a different color, and I was trying to figure out, what am I going to do with my life? It was clear to me that my Catholic faith was going to be central to whatever I did. And it was clear to me as well that it was going to need to be in a far more robust manner than I was finding in parish life as a layperson in a parish here in Massachusetts. Um, it was the faith I grew up with, and I got a wonderful foundation, but I needed more. And the only other example I had for more than being a layperson in the church was being a priest in a parish, or the town I grew up in Spencer, has a Trappist monastery. And I spent a lot of time there growing up. My family knew them well. And that was the other example. I loved what they did there. I loved the community, the ora e labora that they do. Um, and yet I knew I was not going to be a monk. And so I said, boy, like, what is a guy like me to do that really is attracted to the life of the monks, um, really wants to deepen my faith, to bring my life into a robust and deep conversation and dialogue with my faith, right? To bring my life to faith to life, as somebody in this room would teach us. So so I started to, around the same time as I was having these thoughts, I started to meet people in the Catholic worker movement. I started to meet people like Brayton and Suzanne, and the work that they were doing at Agape, the fact that they were addressing issues of violence and nonviolence, the fact that they were attending to the ecological world around us in such a different way than anywhere else I was encountering. And the fact that they were doing all this in a contemplative community was really hitting all of the notes that I was looking for there. It was a way to sort of bring that contemplative side of myself into dialogue with the world, and they were doing it, and I was meeting people that were doing that. So eventually my heart was stolen by L'Arche. That's where I ended up. That's my life vocation, is alongside people with intellectual disabilities in the communities of L'Arche. However, if I think about how I got there and how I got here to the STM, there's a clear through line, and that line starts in many ways back at Agape, going to their Francis Day celebrations, conversations at the Agape community, people I met, the wider community, some of whom is in this room tonight. So I'm deeply indebted for my own vocation, I think, to Brayton and Suzanne. And it's a real pleasure to introduce people who live the theology that we study here, who live our gospel values. You know, the prophetic witness to gospel values on the margin, gospel living on the margin. That's a heavy title. Like, that's a lot to live up to. If there's anybody that I know that can live up to that, that can do that authentically and present it here tonight, it's Brayton and Suzanne. So it's a pleasure to welcome you and to introduce you here to everybody.
Well, my name is Suzanne Belote Shanley, and today's gospel gives us a grounding in what we can all think about in terms of water. Mini wachoni, water is life. We hear this in today's gospel from Ezekiel. This is a handmade water bucket, which was made by Beatrice Manasseh Jackson, who was in the Michigan tent at Standing Rock with my husband Brayton, and along with 30 or more other people. So when we're thinking about the beginning of this session with all of the diversity of the people who have come from far away as the Cape, as far away as Manchester, New Hampshire, and as close as just down the street, it becomes a kind of central focus for us, Scripture. And Jesus overturning those tables, and what does that mean in terms of violence and nonviolence? And that became quite a scriptural discussion for us today, as it has for the last 41 years of our being community. And I would like to start by thanking, however, Tom Murphy, Tom Groome, wonderful Steve, and also pointing out that two younger people from our community are here, and they begged me, if you're going to introduce me, don't ask us to talk, please. And there they are back there. And that is Ray Poole and Michael Hardgrove. And we would not do that to them. We would not put them on the spot, but they came with us. And so why don't we start with a moment of silence, and I will break the silence with a prose poem by Daniel Berrigan. Some of you may be familiar with Daniel Berrigan, a Jesuit who has spoken here and been very involved with many of the Jesuits in New York. Tom Massaro, who also spoke here and with whom we are good friends, and Father Jack Fagan, who was very present here in Roxbury. So the long-standing relationship that Agape has with the Jesuit community is very important to us in a way that defines our consciousness too. And those roots in our Jesuit life have really been part of everything that we do at the community. So why don't we just have, again, another little moment, and to start, I will read this little prose poem, which actually was in a letter that Daniel sent to us in the 1990s when we were very involved in the Atlantic Life community, which is a witness resistance community that still exists. So just one quiet moment. Oh, dear ones, sometimes the uphill tends to be awfully perpendicular, and we all turn into mountain goats or rope hangers, and we dangle and sweat and pull, and we might even make it to the next ledge. Given the world, I wish you, us, the next ledge. We could do worse, but here we are, and a muted alleluia and a thank you that never dies in the throat. Wow, here we are, and a muted alleluia and a thank you that never dies in the throat, because we are here because of the legacy of nonviolence that starts with Jesus and moves us into areas that, as people of faith, we find a destiny in the prophetic Jesus, who today, controversially, for all the centuries people have been debating, scholars, was Jesus violent? Did he whip the animals? Did he whip the people? And we know that the nonviolent Jesus in that act was an act of prophecy where he was fulfilling his understanding of his messiahship. And Jesus, as a nonviolent prophet, has led me to be very interested in women as nonviolent prophets, because my whole life has been spent in many ways going to Catholic school as a youngster and being very familiar with male names who were the prophets. But for me, the women prophets become a central sounding board for me. Elizabeth Johnson writes an incredible book here, and some of you may be familiar with it, Friends of God and the Prophets. And she says that prophets are moved to speak truth to power about injustice, thus creating possibilities of resistance and resurrection. Resistance and resurrection is part of the identity of the Agape community. And it's part of how we began and co-founded the community with Father Charles McCarthy, who isn't here, but was a professor at Notre Dame University, Steve and Nancy James from Haiti, although not Haitians. They were 35 years missionaries in Haiti. And that founding principle was in understanding that we needed to do something that Dan Berrigan also talks about, stand somewhere in the world. And that became a motif for the community, contemplation and action. And Pat Ferrone, who's here, was part of those early days and is now very involved with Pax Christi and St. Susanna's Parish. And Bob and Tara Wegner are here, and they bought a home that was condemned that Brayton and I purchased, having liquidated all our savings to start the community. And without them and their purchase of that home, I'm not sure that we would be standing here. But Elizabeth gives us that sense that wisdom, friendship, the friendship of everyone that is here, whether known or unknown to us, and that we're in the process of delighting in the good and denouncing evil. So those two things, living in the moment of goodness and still denouncing evil, and how to do that in the world today with what we know we're now experiencing, and we have experienced for centuries. But there's something about what Elizabeth says, reading history from the margins. And that reading history from the margins brings out the center of power for women to find a place to stand and challenge and to press down on their lives in church and society. And so for me as a woman, being in the Agape community has given me an opportunity to have a dimension of my femininity, my divine feminine show in leadership areas that would not have been possible in the church and weren't possible in the church as I was experiencing it. And so this notion that Elizabeth talks about is that the prophet, in my sense, the woman prophet, in the sense of speaking the truth to power, not some kind of exalted status, but the prophet is the power of the Spirit, the power that recognizes that the crucified one is with us and aligns the church with this crucified one. And I love this phrase she has, Jesus the defeated. Jesus the defeated. This is our prophet, the defeated Jesus. And somehow we struggle within our Agape ministry, and we all do within our various lives, I'm sure, with a sense of profound defeat. If you've spent the 41 years we've spent teaching nonviolence from kindergarten up to college and coming to Boston College, and for the first time, Boston College students coming to us in 1992 with Sister Elle McClellan, who's our SCJ, and she's sitting here. We picked her up tonight. She brought the first Boston College group. And usually there's a sense of expectation and a great feeling of, oh, we're coming to something that Tom referred to a community where people are living a nonviolent life. But now there is, I feel, and we sense this from many of the young people we talk to, a sense of defeat, a sense of calamity upon us, a sense of where do we go to keep our hope alive and to find a space where we can be ourselves and at the same time, as Elizabeth says, we can break the spell of the history of victors. And this is what we try to do at Agape, is to break the spell of the history of victors. And a little vignette about it, which gives you a more down-to-earth version of things, is 2 weeks ago, a major cable that connects our straw bale house, which we built from the ground up and we call Bridget House, which Brayton will show you slides of, with our main house, which we call St. Francis House, because you got to keep that feminine, masculine unity, right? And our daughter, when she was 14, was so embarrassed. She said, and it's in the book, Ma, why do we have to have our houses named after saints? It's so embarrassing. And she used to say, I can't stand it. Please, when my friends come, don't tell them this is St. Francis House. This is just my home. So here, part of our lives is this cable breaks. No electricity or very scanty electricity and very scanty water for the last 2 weeks. So what are Michael and Ray doing? They're hauling buckets to the well so we can flush the toilet with the well water. We're digging the trench together. We're doing it at the lowest cost we can possibly do it because that's what living nonviolence means. It means saying we have hands, we have feet. And I must say, however, when I picked Elle up tonight in Framingham and she's at an independent living place, I said, can I stay here for a couple of weeks? But she didn't say yes yet, so I'm not sure. Anyway, we're talking about where we are at Agape and how our journey has been shaped by various people, particularly for me, by women. And Eileen Egan was one of them. She was Dorothy Day's closest friend. And in 1992, she wrote an article, and I have this faded, yellowed Catholic worker paper. And she wrote an article entitled, Remember the Evil We Wish to Deny. And in it, it was a year after the Persian Gulf War. And in it, she gives a rendition of what happened in that war that if we were to read the New York Times tonight, tomorrow, or watch Amy Goodman, we would say, oh, it was that war. Oh, I thought maybe she was talking from the spirit world, as she has died long ago, about this war. And these are the women who have, for me, shaped consciousness about nonviolence, because she actually termed the ethic of nonviolence and This is a wonderful thing that many of the bishops have picked up on, including Tom Gumbleton, called the seamless garment. That was Eileen Egan. She defined the idea that nonviolence is the garment of Christ, which is seamless. And so from birth to death, we are involved in a journey of consciousness. And that journey of consciousness is a radical faith. And we know the sisters, Sister Mora, who was assassinated in Salvador, and the nuns who worked in Salvador, Ida Ford and Jean Donovan, they too become touchstones for me in terms of prophecy, because they refuse to leave the people living on the margins. I mean, when we look at our life, it doesn't seem very marginal, to be honest with you. It seems like we're really struggling at times. You know, we live a simple life. We're vegan. We have people come to the house that were built from the ground up by over 200 people, but it's not really that marginal. And I love the title, and we titled our book Loving Life on the Margins. But I think what really we are experiencing is living and loving a life that's alternative. And one of the ways we used to define agape when groups came from colleges is that we were living in voluntary poverty. But boy, did we learn not to use that phrase too glibly when a group of inner city students came to agape and they said, we don't want anything to do with voluntary poverty. We're living in involuntary poverty. I don't want to hear that term. And so, you know, marginalization for people in the world and people that come to agape, and we have many, many opportunities to greet people from various cultures and backgrounds. And I can remember one of our celebrations, we had Rabbi Sheila Weinberg from Amherst. We had a Palestinian Muslim professor, whose name I can't remember right now. And we had an Episcopal priest. We had the Buddhist Peace Pagoda people, and we had people from the local meditation center, the Buddhist Meditation Center. So this is a way that Agape tries to bring in and culturally be a touchstone with the institutional church, because without the support of the women religious with whom we have been involved for so long, Sister Denise Kelly, right here in Framingham with the Bethany Hill School. Brayton and I taught there with others in the community for years, working with the people on the margins, homeless people, people of color, people who didn't have a place to live. This is working on the margins, and we're in solidarity with that. And I want to close with a tribute to Father David Gill, who was the chair of the classics department here for many, many years. And oh, if only David could be here, right, Elle? What a wonderful thing it would be. David found us out, or we found him out somehow when he chose to be a pastor in Roxbury at I forget the name of it, St. Stephen's, St. Mary's of the Angels. That's right. And we clicked. We didn't know David was a classics chair here at BC. So what happens? A relationship begins. 12 years, he was the chaplain in non-residence at Agape. He never missed a meeting of what we call our Mission Council and Advisory Board. He spent holidays with us. He loved the upstairs room that was the tiniest room in the house. And it was that relationship that opened us up into an entire world of Jesuits and Jesuits who are living on the margins, and all of the relationships that came out of that forming and continuing to form us. And David did something pretty astonishing, and that is Condoleezza Rice was invited to speak here during the Iraq War. And 230 faculty people were organized by David and a number of others who refused to stand and applaud Condoleezza Rice. And I have the flyer here. And they held up the flyer, 230 faculty. David helped organize that, not in our name. And they turned their backs on Condoleezza Rice. And David gave an honors speech for people, undergrads, who were graduating. And of course, that was the celebration that Condi was one of the keynote speakers. So he goes into this room with 350 parents and students. He starts quoting Dorothy Day, St. Francis of Assisi, Daniel Berrigan, Dorothy Stang, Elizabeth McAllister, people who were part of the nonviolent tradition. And then he said, I stand firmly with Jesus as our nonviolent Messiah, and that means no war. That means no violence. That means living life on the margins. And there was a very tepid applause, just like this. And of course, our daughter was saying, don't stand up, Ma. Don't embarrass me. But David, along with Dorothy Stang, along with Elizabeth Johnson, along with Dorothy Day, along with Eileen Egan, these are the people who give us the prophetic voice that we together as a community, all of us, so many from diverse groups here tonight, have this lineage and have this legacy. And what a gift. What a blessing. So thank you so much for sharing that gift and blessing with us tonight.
Greetings, everyone. It's good to be back at Boston College. It's always good to be back here. I graduated from the Institute of Religious Education and Pastoral Ministry, late 1980s. Tom Groome was my thesis advisor. I had not a thesis, but a final project, and so he was a joy. He was a joy to work with, and I'm just so glad that he's here tonight and that this is the scene. My thesis was Agape Community, a life of prayer, voluntary poverty, and nonviolence, and that's kind of the values that we've kind of held forward. We were just starting the community then, and this was the first thing that I'd ever written um, on the community. And of course, Tom said, "It's splendid. Oh, it's splendid. It's very good, splendid." So that gave me some encouragement. The institution was a perfect academic environment for me. Suzanne and I were building Agape from the ground up in that time in the 1980s, and I could study at the institute part-time and learn so much from these prophets that were teaching in the summer institute. It was just unbelievable that people would give these 2-week courses, and the formation that it represented, that we were starting something and you had access to Henry Nouwen, renowned author, Catholic priest, preacher, activist, legend in Christianity, I think. Houston Smith, World Religions, a scholar, Religions of Man, if you'll excuse the term. It was his famous book. Paulo Freire was teaching here. Can you imagine? Pedagogy of the Oppressed. His thesis was that that if you stick with conventional education, you perpetuate oppression. Teaching a 2-week unpacking that. Gustavo Gutierrez, father of the liberation theology, teaching. Sister Sandra Schneider's a feminist, a bunch of feminists in this program. Gospel of John scholar and spiritual director. She gave a stunning course on spiritual direction. Sally McFaig, Supernatural Christians. She became a chief voice in the ecological movement as a Christian. Phyllis Tribble, redefining the meaning of Hebrew scriptures in light of women. Father George McCrae, S.J., New Testament scholar. And I just want to say the formation of that, and that's real learning. That's real learning. I want to start with something that George said, Professor McCrae said, that struck me so deeply. He said, when referring to the Gospel of Matthew, he said that Jesus' teachings on nonviolence are likely to be Jesus' words, word for word. That's what scholars try to determine. What is the authentic voice of Jesus? Likely to be Jesus' words, word for word, because Matthean community was an oppressed community. And oppressed communities do not come up with nonviolence. They have to reach for something like Jesus. You have to reach outside of your own limitations and your own fears to get to love of enemy. So, a little of the background. I grew up in a suburb of New York. I grew up middle class in a wealthy suburb of New York in the 1950s and 60s, and life was good in the general. My parents were Americans of Irish descent, and that meant that they were Catholics. Like my father was thoroughly a devout agnostic, but because he was Irish, he was Catholic. Right. The baby boom was in full progress, and the churches were packed. It was an obligation. It was an obligation for my parents, being so devoutly agnostic, but they insisted that we go to church. And we did what we were told in those days. That's not so true anymore. We did what we were told. My sister and I made our way to church, 10 o'clock. If you wanted to sleep in, you go to 12. And so the experience of faith, which was church, did not speak to me. Did not speak to me. And so I went off to St. Anselm College in Manchester, New Hampshire, Benedictine College. And I didn't go there to be a better Catholic. I didn't go there to learn about Catholicism. I went there because it was a family school. My uncle, Joe McDonald, was a legend at the college, head of the philosophy department, and a disciple of Peter Morin and Dorothy Day. Went to Fordham and got to know the Catholic worker early on and started his own Catholic worker farm. And he had the insides of Peter Morin, that kind of voluntary poverty, Boy, he had it. So that was why I'd gone there. My sister went there, my cousins went there, and I had to take 4 theology courses, 1 a year, and I fell in love with it. I fell in love with it. Give me the rituals, or give me the parish, wealthy parish church community. Nothing happens. I started to get with the ideas of theology, and beautifully taught, and I was hooked. It was the first thing that ever got me in life, was this. And then when I was a senior in college, I took a course on comparative religions, and I was home. I studied the Hebrew, the Hindu mystics, the yogis who practiced their philosophy, and Buddhism. And I realized that what was drawing me was practice, that they were that the average person was taking their faith seriously. And I wasn't seeing any of that. And they were talking about practice. They were talking about how you actually live these teachings. And I thought, well, what is my practice? My practice is I say a rosary every once in a while as a kid, because I was told to. And that was my practice. Other than that, we go to church on Sunday. And if you don't go to church on Sunday, your parents get all upset that you're losing your faith. Um, so um, I was deeply moved by all this. It was also Gandhi was being taught, and the thing that was so striking about that was that he lauds Jesus as the influence for his public witness. He spent 11 years in jail doing civil disobedience, and he gives Jesus' Sermon on the Mount: love your enemies, bless them that curse you, pray for them that despitefully use you. That went straight to his heart, and he took that uh, into the public realm. He also gave us a warning. And the warning was, he said, I'd be Christian if it weren't for Christians. I know too many Christians that betray Jesus every day of their life. They justify brute force and betray Jesus every day of their life. I tell Hindus that their Hinduism would be better if they knew Jesus, but I would never suggest that they become Christian. So now I'm getting the message, okay, that somehow this meaning, well, ultimate things that Paul Tillich talks about, is that ultimate meaning is nonviolence. Ultimate meaning is love, is preferring to love than to kill, is preferring to die than to kill. And also the contemplative life, grounding that in the prayer, so that the evolution of how you love under difficult circumstance is an inside job. But Gandhi would say that self-control is what we're after out of our prayer life. And if you can control yourself and your anger and your violence, then you will be respected even by the enemy. So I find myself oddly being drawn back to Jesus. But it's not necessarily anything to do with the Catholic that I grew up with. And I returned to the church as a pacifist Christian through the influence of Charlie McCarthy, as Suzanne has mentioned, and the prophets. So I want to go back to Jesus, but I say, well, I'll go back as a Catholic because I love the mystical. I drink up that sense of mystique that Catholics have and Catholic tradition has. It's just drenched in the mystique of, when you just think of the Eucharist, we're so used to the Eucharist, but just the mystique of the Eucharist is enough to put you in full-time awe. And so that mysticism was always there, it seemed to me, and that's what I experienced some of as I got older. But it was the prophets. It was the example of the prophets. It was Daniel and Philip Berrigan, Catholics, telling the truth and paying the price, paying up personally, as Phil would say, right? Doing your homework and paying up personally. And so it was the prophetic example that brought me back. And I came back to the church for the first time. I came back to Jesus for the first time. And so I was home. I was home in my 20s. And then I met Suzanne, and we were married in a Catholic mass. We were really doing the transition. Here was the transition. You want to hear the We were getting married. We would be attending Quaker meeting because Quakers walk their talk. That was the idea. Quakers walk their talk. Catholics, well, some of them do. But walking the talk was what authentic religion was apparently all about, and all of the prophets were reminding us of that. So, so we got married in a Quaker meeting in Cambridge with a Catholic mass, and they let us do it. They let us do it. I think we didn't burn the incense. I said, you can't burn the incense because they'll smell that when we leave, and that's not Quakerly, So, so we called it a Catholic wedding. And it was great, and it was a bridge over into the new life. into being reborn. I can relate to that. So you have two essential questions in life, and it depends on, you can't skip them, and if you do, you're going to pay for that. But there's two questions, and one is, who am I? That's the essential one. All mystics say that, all contemplatives, all searchers, or even the Asian religions, the Buddhists would say that too. Who am I? And I think we had come to that start of that conclusion of what we are, Suzanne and I, in our 20s, let's say. And that is, we are a nonviolent follower of Jesus. We were loved into existence by a nonviolent God. Jesus is nonviolent because God is nonviolent. And that's who we are. Now, what are we supposed to do with our life if that is so? How do we live our life? How do we live in this world? In this world. Oldest philosophical question there is. How do I live in this world? If you don't figure out who you are, then you won't really discern the right decision of how to live in the world. And so that is what I'd like to just briefly give you a glimpse of after we've decided and discovered and discerned who we are. So I will change positions now. For the Agape community. This is 34 acres of land. This is a panoramic view of Francis House, named for St. Francis of Assisi, and Bridget House, that tiny little green roofed structure next to the shed with the two windows. That is Bridget House. And in the middle is the garden. And what this is a classic back to the land movement. Peter Moore was big on that. Back to the land. So you're coming back to the land. It could be open meadow, or it could be mountain, or it could be woods. So ours is woods, okay? And that kind of defines your life, right? And it's outdoor. A lot of it is outdoor. And so what we do is we homestead. So we come to raw land and we clear the land. And Bob Wagon is here tonight. He's going to say a few words, maybe, if we're lucky. And he's the architect. And he also got the chainsaws. Or I got the chainsaws, but I gave him one of them. And the two of us cut the trees, never having cut trees before. So that's real faith. That's real faith. And the only reason I did it is because Bob has an air of confidence, even when he doesn't quite know what he's doing. The air of confidence is incredible. So we cut the trees, and then we build a building. So we learn how to build. Bob was the architect of Francis House on the right, and then we have a collection of Agape people, Agape supporters, skilled Agape people who could build. So we had 5 of those people, and I was learning on the job. So I was paying the bills, really. But I was trying to be a carpenter, and I learned quite a bit in those 3 or 4 years that we did that. Also, there was a network of community. So it's always about the community. And that's very Christian. It's very religious in some ways. Your community. You have to find your community. And so we did. And through Suzanne's diligent efforts at building support of people, we had hundreds of people come and help us build. And we do 3 things. We clear land and build, and learn how to do that, and repair if we can. We cut wood for heat. That's your heat. So immediately you have some control over the horrible expenses of the modern world. And you grow vegetables for food. And we are a vegetarian community and now vegan community. So that is the classic homesteading life, and that's the grounding for the others. The most popular thing that young people feel about Agape, the reason they come is on the far left there, you have the basketball hoop. They think, nonviolence is okay, the simple living is okay. Basketball. So that's what entertains them. Whoops. Okay, this is St. Francis Day, 25th anniversary. We have a St. Francis Day every first Saturday of October, and this was the final circle. Again, we as a community are co-founded in 1982. We are a lay Catholic intentional community dedicated to prayer, sustainable living, and nonviolent witness. We take Francis because he's a combat veteran who becomes a pacifist. No better story than that. And he loves the earth and he loves the animals of the earth. And the reason that birds land on his shoulder is because the birds understand him as harmless and loving. That's why it is, not because it's cute and it makes a nice statue. He's the real thing, eh? This is the two housing structures, St. Bridget House, St. Bridget of Kildare. I realize Tom Groome is here, so I better be accurate on this. Bridget of Ireland, and her cross is straw cross. And when I was in Ireland, this is what I was told, that the straw cross is a sign of hospitality and peace. And so I figured, well, Bridget was insisting that we name the house after her, so we did. This is, I'd like to alert you to the top picture, especially young people, the top photo, and that is that we gathered a collection of people who had been were in their 20s, been through college, and were wondering what to do with their life. And they knew too much. And it's hard to know how to discern when you know too much at an early age. And how do I live in this world when I have this kind of faith? How do I live in this world when I don't want to just join up and I don't just want to get and spend? How do I do that? So Martin Luther King would say, don't get too well adjusted to this culture, to American culture. Don't get too well adjusted. You want to be maladjusted. You want to be creatively maladjusted. And so that's what this group took as a name, is the creative maladjusteds. And it was MAL for short. It was kind of a in your face, MALs. We're the MALs. And so they discerned over 3 years. But it gives you an idea of a productive way of dealing with knowing too much or being too enlightened about the way the world works, that you need community to figure out what it means and where you're going to go with that. On the right-hand side there, we have the Hermitage, which again is our commitment to silence and solitude and the contemplative life. And so people come and spend days in the Hermitage, 1 day to 10 days, and they are alone with God. And it's a place apart. They say the retreat in the Christian tradition is a place apart. If you want to go into a different mindset and get out of the race or the chase, you need to go to a place where you can do that. And that is, for us, the Hermitage. We use it ourselves. We offer it to people in the extended community. And it's a real blessing. It's always nice when people are in the Hermitage and you know they're there. You can feel it. You can feel the blessing of the choice to do that. And you can feel the beauty of it and the power of it. This is our chapel on the lower left. That's also Bob. Thank you, Bob. Bob was heading up that design too. And it was built by 4 guys, and Suzanne was in on the decision making, and so was I, that never built a chapel before, but spent a lot of time in chapels. But we didn't have to go downtown to get the rubrics from our archdiocese. We just sort of figured it out. And that's what we came up with. And we are we pray at 7:30 every day in the chapel. We have special liturgies throughout the season. And what was it? 5 or 6 years ago, Emily and Bennett, who were part of the Creatively Maladjusteds, decided to get married. They were BC students. They came to a retreat, and they never let up after the retreat, and they stayed in touch, and then they came and they got married in the chapel. It was beautiful. This is Ahmed Al-Hadidi on the left there, with holding the Moor sign. He's from Iraq, and he was in Iraq during the bombing in 2003, and he suffered a lot of trauma with that. So we befriended him through the peace movement, and he also was friends with another family that had been terribly wounded. It was a family of four. The mother was killed in a checkpoint attack by the United States military, and so they were here to get medical help, and we got to know them, and we still are very close to them. So that's who lives at Agape. Moor, they holding the Moor sign because Ahmed said, in the United States, Moor. The United States is Moor. Moor is always better. So he got a kick out of that. On the right hand, upper right hand, are the people that really make a lot of the Agape happen. They are interns and volunteers. In this case, they're summer interns from the colleges, and workers. Workers, so they volunteer to learn how to garden and to farm, and they get room and board. These are some of the other people who have lived at Agape or are no longer with us, some of them. On the left, we have Mike Hope. And Mike Hope showed up one night about 20 years ago, and he had been living in his truck. And he knocked on the door and he said, I heard you help people like me. I'm homeless and I need a home. I need a place to live. And we don't just say yes. Usually, what I end up doing, if I had to be totally honest, is that Suzanne makes a decision, because women always know. They know something that men might not know, or men might say, "Oh, sure," but women always make sure it's going to work, because we had young people living there, right? We had young college students. So he turns out to be very charming, and Suzanne said, "He's on. We'll take him." He said, "Let's do it." And so he moved in, and then we realized that he could fix everything. He had grown up kind of working class poor, and he knew how to fix everything because there wasn't any money in the family to pay for things. So that was Mike, and so for 10 years he was our handyman. He got a place downtown, and we miss him now because he died of a heart attack in March. So huge loss, gigantic loss. Up on the right, upper right is Paul McDonald. He came out of Norfolk prison after 10 years in prison, in Norfolk prison, and he got released and paroled earlier than he expected, and his own family didn't want any part of him. His father put out a restraining order on him. Now, I knew Paul from a course that I was teaching at Norfolk on nonviolence, teaching nonviolence to the inmates, male inmates. Quite a powerful experience, just listening to their stories. And so I knew Paul, and I liked Paul. And we had about 15 students, and Paul was the smartest and the most aware of them all. And he was also very funny. So, and he comes and he spends the summer with us and gets his legs and figures out where to go. On the bottom is Paul Noro, who is a college student, a philosophy student, and he comes very philosophical, always reading philosophical texts. Very, very smart, very interesting guy, beautiful guy, very, very, very sweet guy. And we prayed at night, and we said the office at night in those days, and he said, I don't want to come down to prayer because I'm reading the philosophical texts, and this prayer is interrupting that. And I said, that's the point, Paul. It's supposed to interrupt your philosophical reading. And then to his left is another homeless man. I forget his name, but he also came through. A friend, Randy Keeler, called us up, who was a well-known person in our network, a tax refuser and a nonviolent activist. And he said, could you give him a place to live for the summer? And we did. It's very profound to live with homeless people under these circumstances, and what you learn and what you realize that you yourself have. These are college students that come for rural immersions, we call them. We've had college retreats on nonviolence, and now we have rural immersions. And so they come and they learn the life. They immerse themselves in the life. So that means we pray together, and we eat together. Uh, we talk about simple living and nonviolence and faith. Little talks, lecturettes, you might call them, and they work. They work. And I found it's profound that when we did nonviolence retreats, which were like a retreat where you don't work, you can get to very deep levels with the group. But there's something about work that does that. It's very. I think it reminds me of something Gandhi said, that if you want a good sharp mind, work your body. Don't just be sitting and reading. And anyway, so that was beautiful. On the right is left is Springfield College. On the left of Springfield College, on the right is Holy Cross. Straw Bale House. Now we're into the ecological realm. That we have two mediations, a human-to-human mediation. I got this from Thomas Berry. That we're mediating our understanding of life through other humans because it's the same species. Let's face it, we need to reconcile all of the violence that we do to each other. So that's one task. Then there's human to earth mediation. And now we're in the ecozoic age, says Thomas Berry. And that means that we have to reconcile and understand our place within the natural world. Okay, so this is the two integrated theology, integrated ecology is what St. Francis calls it. So it's a straw insulated house. It's a R value of 50, which is twice what the super insulated conventional insulation would be. So holding in energy, it's all organic. So it doesn't have any plastic in it, and it's half the cost of regular building materials. So it's good that way. So that's what it looks like, and that's Bo the dog down there, the collie. See, that was our daughter's dog, and he was a joy. He was a real nonviolent dog. He loved everybody. He would have just lapped up any criminal or crook or thief or I don't know. He would have just loved them. He was an unconditional lover. This is the final product. I kind of like that one better. But this is what it looks like. You put stucco over it because you have to survive a New England winter. This is solar energy that the IPCC report is we need to, Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, we need to lessen our carbon footprint by 40% by 2030. So we better get started. And solar energy is how we're doing it. And so both houses, this now is a rigid house, but that is now completely paneled. It has solar hot water and photovoltaics. Sustainable living. Now we're talking about water, sacredness of necessity of clean water. That there's only 2.3% of the water on the planet Earth is fresh water. 8 billion people, 2.3% is fresh water. 1.3% is accessible. So it's a precious commodity, and we can't lose any of it to survive. So a compost toilet is a small baby step maybe in that. We don't use water. 40% of our water is flushed down the toilet, of our potable water. And this is the final, kind of a cool little bathroom, isn't it? It's a site-built permaculture design that a friend of mine helped us build, who was a permaculture builder. So we conserve drinking water. We have no groundwater pollution. Recycled waste becomes fertilizer, and nutrients are returned to the fruit trees. Now this is a garden. So we grow 60% of our vegetables. The community is vegetarian or vegan, and that is our commitment. It'd be helpful to realize that that if we could lessen our meat consumption by half and grow fruits and vegetables in its place, we could feed the entire world plus 2 million people. So it's incumbent of us if we want to. 20% of the greenhouse gases are food, and so that's where we want to conserve water, and to grow food for the multitudes. This is the greenhouse. Isn't it interesting that the most nutritious food just happens to be green? The greener it is, the more nutrition it is, except for blueberries. What? And blueberries top everything. I mean, I don't get it. So, so this is, it's 2 months to our growing season, and it's a joy. It's a quick trip to Florida without the politics, in the greenhouse. So here we have some of our nonviolent public witness. We remember Hiroshima and Nagasaki every year. And one of the things that I find profound to look at, and looking back, is that we started the community. We left our jobs to live a nonviolent life with others who had gone before us and were encouraging us, peers, Atlantic Life Community and Quakers and so on, Catholic workers. That's how serious we thought it was, that we had to quit the conventional life to abolish nuclear weapons. They're still with us, and so that's a tragic and dangerous reality, and we need to abolish them as soon as we can. The longer we have them, the more likely we are to use them. Lower left is Billy Neal Moore, and holding my daughter Teresa. Now, Billy Neal Moore was on death row in Georgia, 1985. There was a lot of executions in the United States, and we would go to the Boston State House. We were living in Brockton, Mass. At the time, and we would fast and vigil in opposition to the death penalty. And we knew that Billy Neal Moore was going to be executed in Georgia. He was stayed for 20 days, which is very unusual. In those days, you get stayed for 1 day and then they execute you the next day. So it's just more torture, James. So, so we got in touch with Billy. And then Billy said, why don't you come down and visit? So we did. Teresa was 8 months. 8 months, Teresa? That's it. Yeah. And so we brought her to death row at 8 months. And while I was holding her on death row, too. And then he gets out, he's commuted, and he's released off life in prison. And there's Teresa at 5. And now Billy said to Teresa that we both had death sentences. They were going to kill me on death row. And Teresa was born with a heart condition, a deadly heart condition, and she wasn't expected to live. He said, we both live, and God wants that for us. So they're bonded, and Teresa thinks that this convicted felon is her spiritual director. Then there's Pat Ferone right there. Pat Ferone went with us to the Pope John Paul II was against our bombing of Afghanistan after 9/11. He called for an international day of peace, an interfaith international day of peace. And so we went to join them. You never know where the nonviolent life is going to lead. And I think that was Suzanne's idea. And so that is Agape. So, are you up, Tom? Who's next?
This is just extraordinary evening. You can, one of the blessings of being a teacher is that you sometimes have a student, oftentimes have a student that takes you way beyond yourself and that reaches far more faithfully into the convictions and the proposals and the beliefs that you're proclaiming and trying to get them to believe. And then you come meet somebody that comes along and lives it in a radical type of way, as Brayton and Suzanne do, and you're just taken away with it all. It's just extraordinary the life you've both lived and what you've crafted, the witness you are to a deep, deep faith and to an old Catholic faith, even a kind of an Irish Catholic faith in some ways, which of course, but it's just so inspiring. It was lovely to hear you recall the old Summer Institute, which I had a hand in for about 30 years, and the wonderful experience it was for people. But let me invite you, and without any more words, we'll pause for a moment of quiet. And what are you taking away from this evening? And especially that you might want to share with a friend if you feel up to it. But what's the best gift? Because there's wonderful grace at work here, gratia, for free. And so what will it be for you? So dig deep down into your own good heart and discern as best you can. What's the best wisdom you might take away from this evening? Let me be quiet and let you discern that. And now let me invite you to a neighbor. And if you don't feel like, I always say this to students, if you don't feel like talking to your neighbor, don't worry. Be ready to listen. The neighbor always has something to say. It's invariable. So turn to a neighbor, any old neighbor, and have a chat. 2 minutes. Unfortunately, we are short on time, but let's take a 3-minute chat with the neighbor, what you're taking away, and then we'll come back and hear some sharing of that with the whole community. All right, go to work with the neighbor and have a chat. So let's hear some comments and maybe some further comments. What insights, wisdom, convictions that you're taking away? What do you tell people when they go home? When you go home and they say, "Well, was it any good?" What do you be sure to say? Like it confronted the hell up. That's one. That's one.
Uh,
Do you have a question? Any comments, thoughts?
You didn't talk about how do you sustain yourselves?
That's a very good question, Carlotta. We live on donations. And when we started the community, we put all of our savings such that they late 20s, early 30s. I took out my teacher retirement, and that gave us enough money to start to buy the land. And so now, when we have a crisis, we put out a call, and we did have a crisis in that this thing that happened that I mentioned. And lo and behold, a certain woman religious we know who happens to be one whose name I will not mention puts out a call to her order, and we receive $800 for the repair that we needed initially, and this is how we live. And I guess it comes from having the background of the 41 years, people trusting that we have a committed lifestyle that could be nourished by donations. And so Dorothy Day made a very special comment about she's grateful to the people who keep her in voluntary poverty. So, in a way, you have to be sustained by somebody. And that's why we don't call it voluntary poverty anymore. We call it voluntary simplicity, because we do receive gifts from people who are generous, and many of them are in this room right now.
There's three kind of community economics that I think are major. One is that the community has a cottage industry, like the Trappists have jam, okay, and other communities have they sell something. and they make it that way. And it's a combined effort, right? The other way is that people work part-time outside the community, people pool their money and do it that way. The third is the best, I think. And that is, it's like missionary work, that you try to do good works. You say you're setting up shop to do good works. You can't be worried about the money. You're too busy on the good works, and things cost for that. States, that'll work if people think that you're doing good work. And what we do, Uganda came to Agape, and he was charismatic. He was in priest, and he said, "You are missionaries for peace." Missionaries. And it is a kind of missionary model where you're trying to stay focused on good works and trust that God will support us.
Any other, L?
My comment was simply that you do what you say. And I think that's very important, not just to talk about it, but to do it. And you do it. So that's my comment.
And so does L do it. She, for a year, took one of the Iraqi family members who was burned over 60% of his body. Americans attacked their car as they were going on a family trip in 2003, and Elle became the grandma mom person who took the Omar, who was burned over 60% of his body, to school every day, drove him and picked him up. So she does what she says too. Anybody else?
Or a newsletter.
Yeah, they're out on the table, and Michael and Ray can show you where they are. And we hope people will sign and come and visit. And we always need help. We always need volunteers. But some of the young people, I'd love to hear what your impression of. Yeah, Alex.
Oh, okay. Wasn't sure if I needed both. Yeah, I don't know if I count as young.
But you also came to Agape from Brandeis, and that would be good to share with people.
Yeah, so I'm an alum of Brandeis University. I don't go to BC. I'm crashing. I heard that Agape was. I grew up in Wellesley. I'm staying with my family for the weekend, but I'm actually a neuroscientist and a medical student at in the University of Connecticut. And when I was at Brandeis as an undergraduate a few years ago, I went to Agape, and I was just blown away. I think it's one of the most impactful experiences, and you two are some most incredible people I've ever met. When you're a scientist, it's all about the data. It's all about what you did. And whenever someone makes a claim, my always response is, show me. Point to where you did it. Point to where it is in the paper, which experiment. Point to the real fact. And when we talk about living a nonviolent life, when we talk about the Christian witness, when we talk about the Holy Spirit being with people, I can point to you two, and I can point to Agape. This is real. I was talking with your residents here, and I was checking. Is it real? Like, are they sneaking bacon on the side? Do they have space heaters? Like, and they vouch for you. It's real. You are the data point that I can point to and say, this is real. And I thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Alex, for sharing that.
And I also think that's what we all need. We all have that. We're all inspired by the decision to do this was being coaxed and insisted upon by peers, people our own age and adults that were saying, let's do it. Do it. Just don't count the cost. So I think that's what we need from each other. We need models. We need models of inspiration. And the people that we know or the people that have inspired our lives are how it happens. And that's how we build community. And it's not alone. I mean, it does seem like Suzanne and Brayton, but it's community. It's extended communities, hundreds of people. And that's what we get in life is we get the community. We get a tough world, but we get a lot of saints.
And it's generational, because one of the people who built the house with Bob, his name is Alden Poole. He was the communications chair at Simmons College when I taught there. His granddaughter is one of the residents now at Agape, Ray Poole. So we have a generational, beautiful model. Any other younger folks there.
Again, I'm not sure if I count as young, but I'll take it. I'm extremely impressed by just the practical reality of you living the gospel in such a radical manner. I often think that it might not be possible, but it's good to have examples of this. I just wanted to ask from your experience of doing this for 40 years, living prophetically, like I have two questions or concerns. One is how do you like have a sense of this is worth it, right? So I'll speak of my own experience. I'm vegan. I live with a bunch of non-vegans, and the question is like, how do I know this is worth the trouble? And secondly, how do you live prophetically without coming as judgmental, know-it-all, and so on, all the other terms that come with that?
Well, we're judgmental and
I don't know to be
all
that.
the time. That's why we need people to push us back. But I think it has to do with calling. That this was a call. Our marriage was a call. I think that God sent Suzanne to me for this. That's what I. And when people say, "Gee, how did you do all that?" Well, you do it with calling. I mean, you get discouraged, and you lose. You can lose hope. I mean, I get more angry than I get discouraged. That's my problem. You just get angry at the way things are going, and it's not going easier, and all of that. It's the Catholic worker, Peter Moran said, we're trying to build a world where it's easier to be good, and that's a hard job. So I think it has to come from the deepest part of you. This is what I was born to do. Now, in terms of this, I have never done anything else. I mean, I haven't accomplished a whole lot of anything except this. And I think it's because I felt the call. And it's not as if I had parents or even relatives that knew what a call was. I got a view of people spiritually understand what a true religious calling is, and that you really are, and what you're going to do, what you're going to sacrifice for. And so I think that sustains us, is that.
What is your name? Daniel. I think one of the challenges now that we're in 41 years of the community, and one of the realistic things that we deal with is, where are all the young people? Will people your age and generation X, Y, Z, and whatever it is now be similarly called? Or will Agape just end as a beautiful experiment, maybe with lots of problems and troubles and so on, for 40 some years? But we're looking at a model that came out of the 70s and 80s. And we're looking at a beautiful model. And Tom, you might want to speak to that. You're nodding so vigorously. Do you think we're over? We're done?
No.
But it does. It's a challenge, I think, to try to convey the way we felt when we were in our 20s, when we had this dynamic 70s, 80s. The church was just moving with all of the alternative lifestyle. And you had Philip Berrigan and Daniel Berrigan, Elizabeth McAllister, you had Elizabeth Johnson, you had Rosemary Radford Ruther, you had all of this dynamism. And you have that now, I feel, but you also have a state of perpetual war, which is the state that we're in, I think, as a globe, a global thing. And where do all of you feel? How do you feel? Could you rise to such a commitment? And does it appeal to you at all? And is it frightening with college loans, $50,000, $60,000, and an economy where you feel threatened, maybe, or that you couldn't ever make a leap like this? I don't know. Tom, did you want to say something to that effect?
Well, I think I was nodding so vigorously because, in the community of L'Arche that I'm part of, we're having similar conversations. It's an sort of dusty model that we're trying to figure out, how do we appeal to younger folks. And I'm not saying that you're all outdated and dusty, but that 70s, 80s model, right? Like, there was a real energy, and that's where L'Arche came out of too. But we think a lot about where do people feel like they belong, and how can we create communities of belonging. I was so struck to hear everything that you both said. Um, Brayton's two questions, like who am I and what am I supposed to do? The answer to both of those is community. I think I am a creature called to build community, and how do we do that today? With perpetual war, as you said, with all the challenges that you named, how do we build community and how do we create places that people can belong and authentically belong and become themselves there? So that's why I was vigorously nodding. Important question, I think.
Well, from this day forward, we'll be sure to shake the dust from our feet.
Yes. Well, so any responses from you young folks? Yeah, let's hear from you. What does this say to you, or is it
I'm an old
frightening?
folk.
Is it not that older ones of us can't say
Yeah,
anything
I'm an
for
old
sure.
folk. I had something.
But anyway, yeah. So does it appeal? Why did you come tonight? What did you feel? Do you feel challenged? Do you feel like it's too self-righteous, or like our friend said, do we get kind of high on our prophetic horse and intimidate everybody? I don't know. But what are you thinking? Come on. Tell us.
But
You were nodding a lot when we were talking.
Yeah, I was actually, I guess, kind of to introduce at least those of us on this row. We're from a small Christian college in Boston that emphasizes nonviolence and adhering to Jesus' teachings of peace and bringing revolution in life through love. Violence and love. So I feel like that speaks, like what you guys have been saying, it speaks to me on that level. And also, I think I don't know if I'm speaking for my whole generation, but I think that there's a lot of people, at least in my generation, I feel this too, who have a sense of the chaos and the almost how life can be just too much most of the time. And so what you're saying about slowing down and looking around at what you actually have, really appreciating deeply the few things, it speaks to me because I think too often I have so many things that I don't appreciate any of them fully. And so the idea of really appreciating your resources. Yeah, slowing life down to where you can actually take a few things and really appreciate them and use them for what they were meant to be. I find that really touching.
Would you be drawn?
Yeah, Conrad. Yeah, yeah. I don't know necessarily about specifically joining Agape, but I definitely drawn to applying the principles that you guys have presented. Yes, I would say I'm drawn to that for sure. Right.
Right.
Jane.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, to me?
That's right.
I'm young. Well,
Older
can you hear me? I actually wanted to talk about some people who are younger than I, because I think they are models of community that are emerging all over the place. The church that I'm a part of, Emmanuel Episcopal Church in Boston, has a covenant with a Jewish congregation, and we share the building, and we work through and live in friendship. And that's not a residential thing, but we now have a cluster of residential communities that originally were connected with the Episcopal Diocese and now are their own nonprofit. And one in particular is affiliated with our church. It's called Emmanuel House. It's in Alston, Brayton. They have a community garden that's open to the neighborhood. They pray together. They're a community that is started out affiliated with our church because for some of the young people in the community, they identified as queer, and some of the Christian communities were not welcoming to them. There's a somewhat broader group of people in terms of their gender and sexuality. But I have the greatest excitement and respect for what they're doing. And they're just making their way. What will happen when they're out of their 30s, and they're the executive director of the cluster of communities. I said to him, we gray hairs are coming. I just finished taking care of my parents just before their death, who were older elders, like I'm a younger elder. So what's going to be the place for us, or what can we do, not just in having people care for us, but in being church as much as anybody else. So, I'm learning from the youngins because I think that's where the learning is. But I'm also concerned about building multi-generational community. But mostly I wanted to talk about this Emmanuel House, and they're very open to folks visiting and hanging out in their garden and picking stuff. And so come see them in Brayton. They're they're in the old St. Luke's and St. Margaret parish, so I think it's St. Luke's Road, something like that. Alston. Yeah, Alston, right. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I was very touched by your view of nonviolence, and I grew up in a community that practiced nonviolence, but it was often relegated to specifically not going to war, participating in war. And so when I came tonight, that's what I had in my head, like, no, not fighting, not killing. And I realized as you were speaking that nonviolence means so much more than that to you. It's nonviolence to the earth. It's nonviolence in your words. And like nonviolence is a way of life that permeates every part. And that was really impactful to me. And then as far as your question of like, are young people interested in this type of thing? So I grew up in New York City, and now I live in Boston. So like almost always lived in big cities, surrounded by lots of people. But I'm so attracted to this simple way of life and like living off the land, homesteading. But I think personally, I have this fear of like if I did that, would I just be people like the people that like there's so many people in the cities that need to hear about Christ. And so is there a way that you do this type of thing in a city? It feels so like incompatible, but I would love to hear if you guys have thoughts on that, like what could something like this look like in a city context.
One is
Caitlin. So we go to Sattler College. Yeah. But a lot of us would be from like an Anabaptist Mennonite background. Yeah. Okay.
Catholic. Born again people might do that, or you create a subculture that where you have a strong boundary and nothing gets in. The evil doesn't get in. Of course, my Hindu and Buddhist friends would say there's plenty of evil already in there, because it's on all of us. So there's no such thing as it. So we have a porous boundary. So we're called to the rural. So that's it. It's a calling. Now, that doesn't mean that we just stay in utopia. It means to the city. Realize people that were most interested in us were people who were suffering in the cities. And they would come to be on retreat or come just to be quiet and to sort it out. And we would be a respite place. Go to the city. And sometimes we go to the inner city. See, it's a Catholic worker model, urban, rural, and rural by its own. I'm from New York City area. I'm lived in Boston for 35 years. I'm not down on the. The farm is a wonderful laboratory. I've learned so much, but my insides are evangelical is to go out. So and that was one of the first things we thought of when we started the community with the other families, is that it's evangelical, if you don't get scared of that word. To where the suffering is most, which is city. And the rest, we offer some form of support. We try to the most desperate people. That we can't do everything, but we can find desperate people. And so I think it was Peter Morin that said, that you find suffering humanity in most cases in the city, but they can be healed in the country, in the rural parts next to the earth. It's very hard to heal in the city, very hard. Even if you're in the embrace of a lot of supportive people who are trying to help you give up drugs or nicotine or bad food or whatever it is, alcohol. So we want place. So the answer is, how do you create a place that's safe and wholesome? And I think the Catholic worker tradition is already doing that.
I think, too, Caitlin, to your point, the people of color marginalized because of poverty generally would not start a community like Agape because there wouldn't be there would be too much oppression, there would be race, there would be cultural barrier. So the communities that we're talking about are white founded communities. So I think it's very important for everybody here to know that one of our interns was a fire department, a person in New York City, an African American with his family roots in the slave culture of this country. He founded with his wife, after living at Agape, a community called Freedom Farm. There's lots of literature there. We call them our sister community. He brings inner city kids from the Bronx as an African American symbol of, I'm going to live off the land. I did have a job. I was a fire department person in New York City, but now you kids are going to learn how to eat out of the land. You're not going to have food deserts. And so there is this too that I think oftentimes our models are too white. And there's a farm called Soul Fire. Have any of you heard of that? And the Soul Fire Farm. And this is interesting. It's founded by an African American woman. I can't think of her name. Anyway, no, not yet. We want our community to start out looking means to live in this culture of racism and violence and oppression against people of color. So that expands the thinking about how we do this. Do we do this not only intergenerationally and open to LGBTQ and so on, but how are we bringing in our Native sisters and brothers, our African American sisters and brothers, Asian, on and on and on. That's a big challenge because I think it could be too isolatingly white if we weren't working at that.
No, I don't mean it. Folks, we're over the and I don't want you to feel that you have to stay if you have a commitment that you need to get to. So please, Suzanne and Brayton are willing to continue to talk. I think that's wonderful. But if you feel, hey, I've got to get out of here, you will not be disrupting or hurting anyone's feelings. Please feel free to go and grab a cookie on your way out or stay. You're welcome.
Thanks. That's great, Steve. Especially the Cape Codders and the Manchester, New Hampshirers and the Berry Health Clinicers. Any other thoughts before?
So the future be more diverse. They have to be, and that is going to, I think, be defined by climate change. We no longer will have the luxury of living alone or nuclear families. We're going to have to join, and I think the diversity is the answer. So maybe we should. Yes, yeah.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for coming. I was going to put a picture of my son. Thank you, Stefan. Kate,
Mm.
stay in touch. Tell Francois we say.
Sorry, he lives a beach lifestyle, right down to his shoes. He uses nothing, no animal whatsoever. He gets his clothing inside the shop. So if he's tired of clothing, he brings it to a consignment shop and swaps it. Yeah, because that helps the environment. Every choice he makes about protecting the environment, and so that he is living his own lifestyle. And he's not a jerk about it, but he will preach it. If there's a you know what I mean? So he's not doing what you're doing, but I think there are young people out there who are doing a version that is, that fits the city life. He never buys books. He allows the library, borrows them, and then he borrows them, audio version, and passes them along. I can go on. I actually can't go on about it because he does it.
How old is he?
29 years old.
Wow. Does he ever express a yearning to be with others? Doing that?
Sure, he joins clubs that are also vegan, and he purposely picks employment that will promote this stuff.
Yeah, I guess when I made a comment about modeling, I do think that we're in an era where you can no longer use outworn models, that you have to appeal. Not that I want to say that lineage and legacy is important, but that somehow the appeal has to be, we have to sit down and deeply talk to Alex, and we have to deeply talk to the other folks who are here. And that's what we do with the community. So what model do you want? Maybe it's not going to be this model of Agape, but what would it be if you want to live outside the mainstream? And
well, I have an idea. Can I?
Yeah, sure.
Well, the thing that I was thinking about, I came in here, right? We talked for a bit.
Yeah.
But then some more people showed up. People that you would know. You talked to them, you caught up, and I saw you grab them by the arm. And I stood on the edge. And I also looked over and I saw Michael and Brayton. They were also sitting. We didn't talk. We didn't say much. And I think that could be. I sense there's something of a generational gap.
Yeah.
Communication and community.
Yeah.
Where because you've spoken how at the heart of us for 200 people who are also I could call on 200 people. I could say I have 350 when I would get.
Yeah.
So I think that the answer to your question of how get people to do this, we have young people who have that connection. View others who are how do you do it? This is my question.
Well, we do call people to our great thing, and we have young people living with us all the time.
I watched you. You know everybody's name. Then you call them by name. Then you introduce them to other people by name. You are a connector.
Connector. Rest. We like to be connected to a bed and a room where I don't have to be with them. And that's the reality of aging.
But the fact of what we did is several communities. It's not just two individuals. It's not all. It always came from the Catholic workers, the priests, they paid for the whole thing in the beginning. Was women religious were right? They were the more supportive. So you have all of that. So it's incredible. But you have to get the renegades, the people that are not threatened by nonviolence and not threatened by alternative thinking. And so that you do it. And there's other communities. There's Quaker communities. There's a Buddhist community, very interfaith. And so all that we do is a is a mixture of that, and it ends up being hundreds of people. But from the beginning, we didn't decide to do it and then build a community. We built the community, and then out of that, this came.
Left my PhD program. So in other words, I felt I needed to launch my life. I love academics. So what do you do if you're a neuroscientist and you want to work with people's brains? It's possible to do that and live alternatively at a reduced income and grow your own food when you need to operate on people and you're going to save people's lives. Yeah. So so it's a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
You try to live the lifestyle we're living, what happens to your doctorate? And what happens to the people who will benefit from your neuroscience research if you're going to put your whole life?
I do think that I want to know your seat because, like you said, you went around, you built it.
Yeah, we could.
You built the community, you connected the community there. I can't do that.
Hmm.
I don't know how to do
Right,
that.
right.
No, we can't go in. We don't know how to do it.
Well, come and we'll help you learn. Yeah.
That's all right. I'll keep it brief because I know it's late, but I'm Bob Wagoner. Heard reference to me earlier, architect, and I've been practicing architecture for, 40, 45 years. And when we want to do a project, we do a lot of work with nonprofits, do affordable housing, supportive housing. The firm's called the Narrow Gate, kind of biblical inspiration for what we do. But when we do projects, there's a lot of things we have to have in place for them to work. We have to have a really highly skilled workforce. We have to make sure all the funding is in place, and we have to pay attention to schedule. Schedule. That's how most of our projects get done. But Agape has taken an entirely different approach to that. So what you saw tonight is you heard about an alternative lifestyle. Well, that means doing things in an alternative way. And I think that's what's happened. The money, well, wasn't always there. The time, it took a lot more time than, any other project would take. There were a few skilled people. Most of the people were unskilled. So it's kind of saying, don't be afraid of doing things in an alternative way. That so many things can happen when you're not afraid to do it in an alternative way and pull in more people. It's the community of alternative ways that really help to create all this.
Sustaining, I mean, I've been like a built block, I live in a house, family, and I cannot circumstances, but there are just alternative ways of doing it. Speaking truth, or in working in marriage, raising your voice, working on issues, those are all alternative ways of addressing the issues in the world that need attention, and doing it in some kind of way that you're trying to communicate the love that backs it up, the passion that backs up. So I think, if you've got something that you're passionate about, and then you see that with other people, because you do, no matter what you're doing, if you're doing something that's alternative, you need people who are. So, I might have longed for something like this, but so I hang around the edges and am fulfilled by the relationships that we've developed. And there are just all kinds of ways that you can support the people who can be more radical, who have chosen to do that. It's not, we can get stuck in a hierarchy of values, in terms of a feeling of diminishment about what you're doing compared to something. Yes, that's what that young man was mentioning. I don't think that's helpful. I mean, I do it all enough. They don't think it's really helpful. Ways in which we
Passion begets passion. If you are passionate, you will attract passion, and that's it. And if it's and you're standing up for it, that's what draws. That's what drew us. Yeah. All right. Takes a while to describe that.
But I want to put it because, and I'm very pleased to see that when you're proud of what you do and you're sharing it with people, you don't believe that everybody should live this. And that was one of the things I expected to hear. I said, that you would say, we live this life and we think everybody should live this life. Well, you don't, and that's great. And bless you for that. And then how do we talk about this and talk about what are the right models? I don't think there are any right models. But there was only one right model. We were only created the giraffe. And everything else was minimum.
Oh, it's an animal with his biggest heart. Did you know that?
Okay. Now we're discovering they've taken this multiple centuries to discover that he's actually created people with more diversity than we thought. We thought that we're only male and female. That's not quite so. So, really, whole world is between you guys. From the born, you know, really that. Hearing would not have technology, is enabling us to share life in other places, etc. And that technology is not because of that. So if unfortunately it enabled us to see this video for the place in the world, hopefully it is there's a method. So the person is and but I think we should be more of you guys who are sharing the simple principle of living together. From the story, it's sustainable living. Version. Fairly, really general.
Yeah, we're certainly not the only example, but I want to go back to the original thing is why was I born? Why was I born? If everybody has to do that work, I mean, it makes sense to do that work. I think that's what God wants us to do is discern what we are supposed to do, not what my parents were supposed to do or what they thought I should do or whatever it is. So I think that's where Agape is one flawed, fallible human effort. Okay. The question is what for the younger generation, what are you being called to? What are you willing to die for? What are you willing to sacrifice for? And then if you can somehow determine that, then you'll find something that God wanted you to find. So I think it's that more than this, it has to be this way or that way. I think we did it this way. And what do you? I remember Dan Berrigan saying that. He says, "Okay, they were criticizing what he had done and said or something." And he said, "Well, what is God calling you to?" In other words, okay, I made a mistake or I'm not perfect, but if everybody is doing their work, everybody needs to find God. I think that's where I'll be an absolutist. They have to find ultimate things, know what you are supposed to do in this life, and that's what God wants, I think.
Now let's listen. And as I was listening to you and the sharing word about connection. Yes. And I think that for us, for those of you who don't know, Ron and I co-pastor an alternative faith. And so you guys and your mom sees and nurtures us. We don't live it, we're not there, but we know you're there, and we know what you're doing, and that gives us love and support and encouragement.
Same with us.
Yeah.
Yes.
People who are seeking a meaningful life in many different ways.
And you were called to the priesthood.
Yeah.
And I feel that as an inner journey that I just love the fact that you would share our priest. And it's just very compelling, right? For us of our generation. And so it is a model, it's a very alternative model.
But it's like we don't all have to look the same.
Right.
But it's going to have a shape that.
But it's an extended community. You're tremendous inspirations to us, and that's Mana desert, and it's kind of a desert in popular culture. So yeah, we need each other. Oh yeah, we're breaking the. We broke the record. Congratulations! You stayed longer after we were supposed to end. Take care.